in particular. That's going to be a very difficult thing, but we'll just use them as a launching point. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. So that tells us that this was written of a time. This story takes place during the time of the judges. Okay? Came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech, the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, the name of the other was Ruth, and they dwelled there about 10 years. Mahlon and Chilion died, also both of them. And the woman was left with left of her 2 sons and her husband. Okay? So that's a jumping off point, and it's not a good jumping off point. One of the great things about this story is that as we have just finished the book of Judges and all of the depressing things we read, particularly as we finished the book, but seemingly it seemed like it wasn't this way, but it seemed like every chapter it said, and the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord. Here we have, in the midst of all that wickedness and rebellion and all that, we have a glimmer of hope, a glimmer of light right in the middle somewhere, and we'll talk about that. Let's see here. About 200 years, I think, is 150 to 200 years before David, before where we're at on Sunday nights. And so it's during that time of the judges when there was wickedness, and here we have just a little glimmer of hope. First of all, number one, the author of the book. Now, the title we have of the book is the Book of Ruth. I don't know that that's what the writer gave the title of the book. That's what we have as the title of the book. It's not given in the book. The writer is not given. But the way it's written, the storytelling, the great storytelling ability of the writer lends itself probably to Samuel. It was written in the time, written after the anointing of David, before the death of Solomon, or before the birth of Solomon. And so it lends itself to the writer being Samuel. And so as far as the author goes, that's about really all we know. And of course, there are all kinds of opinions, depending on who you read, as to who could have written the book. But most people believe it was Samuel that wrote the book. I give you 4 themes of the book. 4 themes of the book. Number 2, themes. The first theme we see is consequences for disobedience. The first consequence I give you is war and famine. Now, this is not recorded as a result of the decisions made in this book, okay? The disobedience. This first one, war and famine. But the children of Israel, we read in that day, verse 1, it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was famine in the land. Why was there famine in the land? Well, if you go back to the book of Deuteronomy, God said, when you come into the land, if you don't act the way I want you to act, if you disobey, if you act like the people that are there now, I'm going to treat you like the people that are there now. And he sent war and famine. Had they been obedient, had they done what God had asked them to do, what he had commanded them to do, this would not be a situation they would be facing. They would not be in this situation of famine. Second of all, number 2, death and destruction. Now we find that here in this book, in particular. Now, we saw it in the book of Judges. I mean, I'm not going to belabor that. We saw that in the book of Judges, and that was a result of them being disobedient. But here, God was very adamant about who the Israelites were supposed to associate with. One of the groups that they were told, do not have anything to do with this group, was the Moabites. The Moabites were wicked, wicked, wicked people. They, the name of their God has slipped my mind. Anyway, this God, what they did the same thing that the Canaanites had done. They had a statue, an image that was huge, and they would offer their babies to their God. This was a wicked, wicked people. When difficult times came, Elimelech says to his wife, we've got to do something else. What we have is not enough to sustain us. They didn't trust God. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. And he says, we're going to the land of Moab. Apparently there was no famine in Moab. Things were good in that regard in Moab. And Elimelech takes his wife and his 2 sons to the land of the ungodly, to the land of the wicked. They're not there very long. I mean, in the scheme of things, 10 years is not very long. The older we get, we understand how short a time frame that really is. They go to Moab. They dwell there for a little while. And Elimelech dies. And not too long later, Mahlon and Chilion die. Had they stayed, yeah, times were tough. Times were difficult. But if they'd have obeyed God, just like even when times get tough, when times get difficult for us, if we will obey God, if we'll do what God has called us to do, He will take care of us. He will keep, I hate to say it this way, keep His end of the bargain, but that's what He'll do. He'll take care of us if we'll do what He wants us to do. David wrote, and he said, I've never seen the righteous forsaken. He's not talking about he's never seen the righteous have a hard time. He's not saying I've never seen the righteous hungry. I've never seen the righteous thirsty. But I've never seen them forsaken. This is a man, David was a man, I don't want to get off subject, but David was a man who ran for a lot of his life. But he said, I've never seen the righteous forsaken. Letter B, we have an example of loyalty here. Ruth in chapter 1 marries Chilion. He dies. She's in her land. Now, Naomi says, look, you're young lady still. You know, if I'm going to have, in that day, things were done different. Generally, if a man died, a brother would wed her and all that. Well, and it was different. Well, Naomi says, look, if you wait for me to get married and to have a child, or 2 children, hopefully they're boys, and they're old enough for you to marry, you're going to have wasted all of your life just about. She said, I release you. I release you. And at first, Ruth and Orpah both say, no, we want to be with you. And she says, no. Go back. Go to your moms. Go to your people. Go to your families. And Orpah says, all right, fine. Kisses Naomi goodbye and goes. Ruth says, nope. I'm with you. I'm with you. Wherever you go, I go. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Now that's a big statement. That's a big statement. Because Ruth had grown up in the environment of wickedness. She had grown up in the environment of the God that required the death of children sometimes. And all her life, she was under the hammer, the judgment of if you don't do right, you're going to be destroyed, which is a much harsher God than our God, for sure. And she says, your God is going to be my God. And there's an example of loyalty, and all through the few chapters we have, we see the loyalty of Ruth. Let her see the reward for faithfulness. We see a reward for faithfulness for Ruth, for Boaz, and for Naomi. We're not going to get into those things yet, but Naomi has doubt. I'll say this. Naomi has doubts. She doesn't go back to Bethlehem until she hears news that good things were happening. But I don't want to cast too much judgment on somebody, because I don't know that any of us would have done it any differently. I would hope that we would not do what Elimelech did, but after he was gone, I don't know that we would have said, hey, things are good, I'm going back. It's time for me to go back. And I'm not going to judge her for that. And she is rewarded for that. Ruth is rewarded for her faithfulness. This is the Israelites would call her godless. You know, even though she said to Naomi, your God is my God, your people are my people. Now, the people of Israel would have said, she's godless. She's a heathen. She's not worthy to be here. But we see an example of loyalty. We see a reward for faithfulness. And then letter D, we have a kinsman redeemer. That's one of the big themes in the book, is the kinsman redeemer. The one who redeemed Naomi, who had been married, who was married to an Israelite, and his death caused her to lose what rights she did have. And now the kinsman, the redeemer, in a sense, and in a very literal sense, buys her and takes her to be his very own. And I don't want to get ahead of myself. We'll get to that down the road. All right? I give you several key verses here, and I'd like for us to turn to these and read these. 1:1 is a key verse. Okay? Came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. Certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. That's the foundation for the rest of the book. The doubt, the disobedience of Elimelech to go into the foreign country when he was not supposed to. Verse 3, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. She was left and her 2 sons. Verse 6, then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. And so that's a key verse. A key verse because she's headed back. We have some foundational things here, some key turning points, particularly in chapter 1. But verse 6 is one of those where she says, you know what, I'm going back. The Lord has visited the people. There's bread in the house of bread now. Bethlehem is house of bread, and says there's bread there now. I'm going back. Down in verse 16. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God, my God. Another foundation verse. You have the move, the death, the decision by Naomi. And then you have Ruth saying, as we've talked about already, where you go, I go. Your people, my people. Your God is my God. Verse 20 is another key verse. And this is key because of the way Naomi viewed herself. And I don't want to get ahead of myself in preaching, but she said unto them, to the people of Israel, when she came back, verse 19, they said, is this Naomi? Hey, isn't that Naomi? And she said to them, call me not Naomi, call me Mara, or Mare, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. Now, let me pause here for just a second. When we look at the story before Ruth, okay, did God force Elimelech to go to Moab. No. Now this is a great story of Romans 8:28. For I know that God, for all things work together for good to them who love God, and them are called according to His purpose. God takes a bad situation and He works it for good. But God did not puppet master Elimelech to disobey His word. We absolutely give God blame or credit, whatever you want to say, for things He didn't do. Here we act like He's a puppet master, making us do things we're not supposed to do. And she says that God hath dealt bitterly with me. No, Elimelech dealt bitterly with you. Elimelech packed up your family and moved into the land of wickedness. And there are consequences for those decisions. It's as ridiculous as driving 120 miles an hour down this road, you lose control and hit a tree and say, well, God just really doesn't like me. No, you have consequences for dumb decisions. They're there. Yet, whenever we make these decisions and we come up with the consequences, if you put heroin into your system, you're going to pay the consequences for it. If you drink alcohol and get behind a vehicle and go down the road and you hit another vehicle and you are paralyzed from the neck down, don't come to me and say, well, God just, is trying to get a hold of me. No. Now, God may be trying to get a hold of you, and He probably is, but you made a decision to get in that car impaired, and you're going to pay for that decision. So for her to say in this verse, don't call me Naomi, because Naomi means joy. Call me Mara, because that means sorrow. And call me that, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. That is not true. We'll get to that again later down the road. Chapter 2, verse 1. And Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. So we have a verse that sets the stage. It's such a beautiful story. And I don't know that Naomi mentioned Boaz before any of this took place. I think Naomi or Ruth, I don't want to say she happened upon, but she chose Boaz's field. Chapter 2, verse 12. The Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. Now this is what Boaz has said to Ruth. Man, I hope I don't do this entire study, get those two names mixed up. Boaz says to Ruth, after he sees her out in the field gleaning, he says to the workers, don't mess with her, let her glean. I don't know that he at first even realized who it was, and then he asked the question, who is this? And they say, that's Naomi's daughter-in-law. She's the Moabitess who has come. And down here, he says in verse 9, let thine eyes be on the field that they reap. Go after them. That means glean with them. Harvest with them. He says, harvest. I've charged the young men, don't touch thee, don't mess with you. When you're athirst, go to the vessels, drink of the water which they've drawn. Then she falls on her face and says, you've shown such kindness to me. And Boaz answered her and said, it's been fully shown to me, all thou hast done to thy mother-in-law, since the death of thine husband, how thou hast left thy father and mother, land of thy nativity, and art come into a people which thou knewest not heretofore. And then he says, the Lord reward thee. He said, you've been so good. You've been kind to my family. I pray that the Lord will reward thee. Verse 16. And let fall. He says to his workers, his fieldmen. He says, and let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them that she may glean them and rebuke her not. We'll come to that again here in a few minutes. Chapter 3, verse 5. This is such a simple statement. But if we could get this, as children, if we could get this in relation to our God as His children, Ruth says to Naomi in verse 5, and she said unto her, all that thou sayest unto me, I will do. Ruth understood that Naomi knew the land. She knew the people. She knew the situation. She knew how to act. She knew how to not act. And Ruth says to her, she says, I'm a foreigner. The way we did things is not the way you do things. And whatever you tell me to do, I'll do it. In our heart of rebellion, so often, we look at those that know more, those that have been down the road, not just as teenagers or children, but as adults. We look at the situation and go, I know better. Yeah. You're an old man. You're an old woman. You don't know. You don't know what's going on today. Nah. Okay, I'll tolerate what you have to say. Okay, all right. How many of y'all have been managers, supervisors, owners, business owners? How many of y'all have? Okay. You ever had I'm going to deal with Dave and Don because I know men. Have you ever had guys come in and you give them instruction? I would say probably in the outdoor working with power equipment world, this might even be more so than, but like, can you give them instruction? This is what we want to do. And they go, oh, yeah, okay. And they do their own thing. Yeah. Generally, that results in get out. Let me get in now. Let me get in, or let me do the cutting, or let me show you what's going on because I told you how to do it, but I got it. I can do it. I got it. I mean, I've been there. I've done that kind of stupidities, you know. But here Ruth, who was a young lady, was in her prime, if you will. She, was not atypical of who we are as people, could have said, you're an old lady. You don't know what's going on. No, she doesn't do that. She says, I don't know. I'm just going to listen to what you have to say, and everything you tell me to do, all that thou sayest unto me, I will do. It's such a small verse. I mean, on your page of your Bible, when you look at the verses as they go, as I scan the verses, that is the shortest verse on the 2 pages that I'm looking at. But it's such a key verse to say, whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do it. Man, what a big deal. Chapter 3, verse 11. And now, my daughter, fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest. And this is Boaz. He says my daughter. He's just young lady, my maiden, if you will. Fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest. For all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. Now, this is not Mary. This is not the mother of Jesus, Mary, born to a Jewish family in Nazareth with all the advantages of Judaism at her fingertips. This is a Moabitess. This is a foreigner. This is a young lady born in a wicked land with a wicked people that serve wicked gods, and here she is in a tough situation. She's lost her father-in-law, she's lost her brother-in-law, she's lost her husband. And she's going to follow her mother-in-law back to her country and just see what happens. And Boaz says to her, don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of things. The people of my city, for all the city of my people, doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. Wow. That's a big deal. Why is she a virtuous woman? Verse 5. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do it. Man, I guarantee you, when we've had those job positions filled by somebody who is a greenhorn, if you will, doesn't know what they're doing, and we say to them, this is how you do it, this is what I want you to do, and if you'll do it in these steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, if you'll do it like that, it'll be taken care of. If they follow those steps and do what you say to do, you know what you say of them? It's a good worker. That's a good worker. They do what they're supposed to do. They follow instruction. Chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. Boaz, in the first part of the chapter, in the last part of chapter 3, he says to Ruth, he says, listen, there's a man who's a nearer kinsman. Tomorrow he's going to have to make a decision because I'm going to tell him. I'm going to tell him about you, about the land, yada, yada, yada. So he goes, in the first part of chapter 4, he goes to the nearer kinsman and explains that, Elimelech's wife is back. Ruth is here. She's the heir. If you want to have the land of Elimelech, do you want to have the land? He asked the question first. Do you want to have the land of Elimelech? He says, oh yeah, I'm the kinsman. He said, well, here's what you're going to have to do. If you want the land, you got to marry the woman. He says, no, I don't want that. So we come to verse 6. And the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar my own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. He gives up his rights. Now this was the manner in former time in Israel concerning redeeming and conquering, and concerning changing. For to confirm all things, a man took off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor, and this was a testimony in Israel. Therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. Interestingly, as I was reading Josephus' account of this, Josephus says that, now we don't read this here. Josephus says that that Boaz called the kinsman and Ruth to the gate. And that Ruth went and took the shoe off. You don't read this here, okay? Ruth goes and takes his shoe off and spits in his face, is what Josephus said. And it was a sign of, you have rejected me, and she spits in his face. We don't have that. Wouldn't that be fantastic to watch? That'd be awesome to see. We don't read that here. But he takes off his shoe, and I don't know how many of y'all were here when I preached on Joshua removing his sandal. And the symbol of removing the shoe, and what you're doing is saying, I give up my rights. Okay, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself on that as well. Chapter 4, verse 13 is another key verse. So Boaz took Ruth, she was his wife. He went in unto her, and the Lord gave her conception. She bare a son. And that's a big deal because that puts Boaz and Ruth, and we'll see, in the line of David. Boaz and Ruth are David's great-grandparents. Obed, I think that's right. I want to make sure here. Let me go to the end. Boaz, Obed, great-grandfather. David was their great-grandson. But not only are they in the line of David, they're in the line of the Messiah. And so Ruth bearing a son is a big deal because of that. Chapter 4, verse 17. And this is chapter 16. Naomi took the child. The women, her neighbors, gave it a name. Interesting that the neighbors named the child. Kind of weird. We would not allow that to happen in this day, would we? There's no chance that we would let that happen. The women, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, there's a son born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, and the father of David. And so those are, for me, the key verses of the book. And then we come to, lastly, number 4, a quick outline of the book. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to follow this outline as we go, but if you're going to outline the book, I give you this outline right here. Letter A, if you you would put it as number 1 in the outline, but as it falls in this outline, it's letter A, decisions. Decisions. And that's chapter 1. Chapter 1 has several decisions in there. First of all, you have Elimelech's decision. We've talked about that. The decision to go to Moab. Then you have Naomi's decision. After they die, she's going back to her land. And that's a big decision. You have Orpah's decision. At first she says, I'm going with you. Naomi, I'm staying with you. Naomi says, no, go back to your people. And her decision was, I'm going back to my land. It would be interesting if we could find out. It would be interesting to see what happened to Orpah. I don't know how we would ever find that out this side of heaven. But when we get to heaven, that will be one of the things I would be interested to find out. That decision to not follow with Ruth. I mean, who knows what God would have done if Orpah had gone and been the same kind of woman that Ruth was. But then you also have number 4, Ruth's decision. And so chapter 1 is a lot of things, but for me it's a chapter of decisions. Lots of decisions made in that first chapter. Letter B, chapter 2 is a chapter of service. Chapter 2 opens, and Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth, the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. Okay, that's verse 1 of chapter 2. Look at verse 2. And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, go, my daughter. And so she goes. She says, I'm going to go do for us. She is now... and we read this, what I'm fixing to say, we read it in chapter 3. Anyway, there's a place in chapter 3 where Boaz wakes up and she's laying at his feet and he says, I want to commend you for not just chasing boys, chasing somebody who had money. You've let this happen of God, basically is what he's saying. And so she doesn't just go looking. She doesn't say, well, I've got to go find a husband. She says, Naomi, I'm going to take care of us. And so the service, Ruth serves Naomi. Number 1, Ruth serves Naomi. Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, let me go now to the field. And she went. And she gleaned in the fields. Why? For her own good? No. She's going to take care of her mother-in-law. She's going to take care of Naomi now. So we see where Ruth served Naomi. Second of all, we see, give me a little bit of liberty here, where Boaz serves Ruth. Verse 7, she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and hath continued. This is the servant talking to Boaz. For those of you who are watching on the internet, that was thunder we just heard. Where was I? Verse 7. She came and hath continued from the morning until now, that she tarried a little in the house. And Boaz said to Ruth, hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean in another field. He doesn't mean, haven't you heard? He's saying to her, don't go glean in another field. Don't go from here, neither go from hence. But abide here, fast by my maiden. Stay here. Let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have not I charged the young men, or I have charged them, they shall not touch thee. And when thou art thirst, go to the vessels, drink of that which the young men have drawn. She fell on her face. Verse 14. Boaz said unto her, at mealtime come thou hither and eat of the bread, and dip thy morsel in the vinegar. And she sat beside the reapers, and he reached her parched corn, and she did eat, and was sufficed, and left. When she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not, and let also fall some of the handfuls of purpose for her. And so Boaz, in service, provides drink for her. He provides drink, he provides dinner, and then letter C, he provides handfills. It says on, it should be of. Handfills of purpose or handfills on purpose would work. In other words, guys, when you're walking along, you get some grain, dig in there and get a big old handful and lay it for her. Lay it in a nice place where she can just pick it up real easily. Don't take it out and throw it on the ground. Leave handfuls. If you find a rock, take a handful out and put it on there for her. And he serves her. He takes, one of the greatest things he can do is to take of his food. Food's money in that day. Cattle are money, right? I mean, that's what you equate it to. Money on the hoof. You go by a house, chicken house, and you smell that rancid smell coming out of there. What do they say? It smells like money. It's money. Food is money. He says, leave some money, if you will. Leave some food on purpose. Handfuls for. Serves her in that way. Chapter 3 is a chapter of hope. Then Naomi said unto her, verse 1, of chapter 3. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, my daughter. Calls her daughter. And the daughter here is different than a time before. And so there was hope to be considered a daughter. Naomi loved Ruth, loved her as her own, and called her daughter. Second of all, to be considered virtuous. What an amazing thing. We've talked about this. That Boaz would say to this Moabitess, I don't know if you get it, but this is a big deal. This is like a Georgia fan calling a Florida fan friend. You know, I mean, it's actually worse than that. More like a Georgia fan calling a Georgia Tech fan a friend. Back there shaking his head. No, it's worse than any of that. This is like a Jew saying to a Samaritan, you're a good person. This is a big deal. My people, the city of my people, know that you are a virtuous woman. Said a lot about her. So hope, to be considered virtuous. And then hope, number 3, to be considered kinswoman. That Boaz would say to her, I want to redeem you back. Sorry we didn't dismiss already. I hope you brought umbrellas. I don't know, maybe it'll pass quickly. No, letter D, redemption. Chapter 4 is redemption. First of all, redemption for Ruth. The kinsman redeemer says, I'll redeem you back. And Boaz in chapter 4 approaches the nearer kinsman. And the kinsman, number 2, relinquishes his rights. Boaz didn't know what was going to happen. Boaz comes to him and he's honest with him. He says to him, there is land to be had. And it's yours for the taking. And the man says, oh yeah, I'll take my rights to that. He says, but you need to know. There's a woman. She's got to be married. It was Jewish law that she had to be married. He says, oh, no, I can't do that. I might lose some of my inheritance. It might diminish my inheritance. And Boaz marries Ruth. Now I think it's Deuteronomy chapter 25. I think that's where it's at. In Deuteronomy chapter 25, God provides. I think this is. This is that's the remarrying of it. And I don't know the verse right now, but God said if a Moabite were to come into the land and they were to become part of the Jewish community, that they could not receive the rights of the Jews for 10 generations. And so when Ruth comes, if she came in with a husband who was not a Jew, and they said, hey, we want to be a part of your culture. We want to be a part of your people. For 10 generations, they had no rights. But the kinsman redeemer marries her and brings her into the land like that, and immediately she receives the rights of the Jewish people. So Boaz marries Ruth. Number 2, the redemption for Naomi. And this probably isn't the right word, but you'll get the picture. Naomi was without heir. She was without child. I mean, her sons were dead. There was nobody to carry on that family. But she's given a grandson. And she now says, my joy is restored. She considers her joy to be restored. And so it's a beautiful story that we will get next week. We'll begin and we'll talk about Elimelech and his decision next week and the effect of it in greater detail than we did this week. But there's just an overview, a very quick, crude overview of the book of Ruth. Lord, I thank you for your book. I thank you for this story, the truth of it, the lessons we can learn from it. And Father, I pray that you would help us over the next several weeks, maybe even months, Lord, to gain much from this great story of love and sacrifice. In Jesus' name, amen. Well,